Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly Intel Brief, where we cover one issue of economic security, one issue of traditional physical security, and one issue of democracy. First and foremost, on economic security, we are now in day 23 of the federal government shutdown. The Senate is here working. The House of Representatives has now been out, not working, but receiving a paycheck for 34 straight days. They've actually been out of work for 93 of the last 112 days. You know how this works. Adults can get in a room and have an adult conversation to solve this. Those are the conversations that are happening now below the surface. We need them to be formal negotiations. So we urge everyone who's sitting at home, including Michigan's Republican representatives, to get their butts back to Washington so we can actually do some work here. In the meantime, the issue still up for debate is the issue of healthcare. And that's because the healthcare crisis continues to become more apparent for people across the country. Meanwhile, this entire fall, people have been receiving notice that their healthcare prices are going up as of January 1. That includes people on private employer-provided insurance, but the people who are really about to feel this are those who are on the healthcare.gov marketplace plans, what's sometimes called Obamacare or the ACA. We've asked for a ton of stories on this issue. We've gotten a ton of stories in from Michiganders. But just to review the bidding, the big beautiful bill back in July cut significantly people who were on the healthcare.gov marketplace plans. Michigan is one of 28 states where we will find out the new price of those plans as of November 1st. That's when open season starts, and you'll be able to go online and see the price of these new plans. Some plans are going precipitously up. We're hearing stories of people in Dearborn Heights who said that their premiums are going from $870 a month to $1,138 a month starting in January. We have another family in Dexter where their plans are going up 122% starting January 1st. So we're starting to hear the real nitty-gritty truth on the ground stories from people and what's going to happen to their healthcare. That's why healthcare is at the center of the federal government shutdown debate, because certainly from my perspective, it is my job to make sure that people can actually afford care for themselves, for their families. And that's really at the heart of this conversation that we're having here in Washington. Secondly, on national security issues, I want to raise an issue you probably weren't thinking about before the last couple of weeks, and that's Argentina. And want to make sure people are aware of what the president is doing vis-a-vis Argentina. Argentina has major economic problems, and President Trump announced last week that he is going to bail out Argentina from their financial crisis. He's going to use $40 billion of U.S. taxpayer dollars, your dollars, to bail out Argentina and South America. He made that announcement, and as soon as he did, the Argentinians made the decision that they were going to open up their soybean market to places like China, make it easier for China to buy their soybeans. You can imagine what I've been hearing on my phones from soybean farmers in Michigan and across the country. Our soybean farmers are saying, why exactly would we bail out a country with our own taxpayer dollars and then allow them to just open up their markets and undercut us by selling their soybeans to China? China usually has bought soybeans from the United States. Same thing with beef, Argentinian beef. The president made a comment that he was going to make a deal as part of this bailout of Argentina, that he was going to buy a bunch of Argentinian beef, beef cattle. You can imagine what our beef farmers were thinking about that. As someone who spent her early life on a beef cattle farm, American beef should be preferenced over anyone else's beef, especially bailing out a country a world away that most Americans have nothing to do with. So just to put some of this in perspective, in Michigan, we have over $1 billion a year in revenue from soybeans. So if our soybean farmers can't sell their products abroad, they are already starting to signal that they're going to need some sort of bailout. They're going to need some sort of check from the government, because the financial situation that they have been put in between this deal that's going on now and with Argentina, but long before that, the president's tariff policy reverberating back on them. So I've already started to see people show up in my office say, We're farmers. We need to exist. We're going to need another bailout, just like we needed in the first Trump administration. $28 billion of U.S. taxpayer dollars went to farmers to bail them out in Trump 1. And now we expect this bailout to have to be much, much bigger. So coming to a theater near you is a big discussion about a bailout package for farmers in America because of the president's very sloppy foreign aid and foreign tariff policy. Lastly, on democracy issues, I want to flag a case that is now being presented to the Supreme Court on the Voting Rights Act. It's a really big case with really big implications for the United States. The Voting Rights Act, just to review the bidding, was a piece of voting and civil rights legislation from the 1960s. And it basically said to states around the country, particularly southern states, that you can't screw around with how people vote in your states in a way that is purposely disenfranchising people of color in your states. You know, the federal government is going to impose some rules here so that you don't completely ignore and disenfranchise African Americans living in southern states. Out of necessity, that legislation passed. There's now a case in front of the Supreme Court to gut the Voting Rights Act. It's being presented now. We could get an answer early and not even wait till summer when we typically get answers from the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court sides with the president on this issue, you could see real redrawing of the maps, particularly in southern states, but in states across the country in ways that essentially get rid of any African American leadership and representation in those states, but that also flip seats from being Democratic leaning to Republican leaning. It's just another way that the president and his team are trying to make a permanent Republican majority in the United States of America. If this VRA is gutted, we think potentially 19 congressional seats across the country could be redrawn to be Republican instead of Democratic and lose significant numbers of African American representation in the U.S. House. So I'd watch this issue very closely. Again, typically we hear answers and decisions from the Supreme Court in the summer, but given how relevant this is to the next midterms, it's possible that we may hear as early 2026.